Thank you, Gita and Elena, for accepting our invitation to discuss Rome. I'm grateful to our partners for today's event, the Iranian Studies Student Forum, and the Canadian Society for Iranian and Persian Studies, and the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute, which has supported the establishment of the Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I'd like to express our personal and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. It has been the traditional land of the Iran Vandals, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River for thousands of years. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across the Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach on their ancestral homeland. My colleague, Dr. Nusha Keizal, will introduce our speakers. Nusha.
Gita Jun, of course, I've been a great fan of your work for many years. Following your work, you're truly a pioneer of art and in the city. And when I saw your name, I was so delighted. And it's an honor to be introducing you and Elena and to be moderating. So now for the formal introduction. Gita Hashemi is a refugee, artist, activist, curator, and writer who works from Toronto, the dish with one spoon, Wampum Belt territory, the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. She lives near Wanscotnack River. Her home in Shiraz was near Khosht River. She works in visual, media, and performance arts, digital and net art, and language-based art, including live embodied calligraphy, as well as in curation and publishing. She has created and or curated many interdisciplinary, generative, collaborative, and multi-platform projects. Thank you for being here with us, Gita. And I'm also the honor to introducing Elena Basile, who lives and works in Toronto, Tree 13. She teaches literature, sexuality, and translation studies at the University of Toronto and at York University. Her collaborative research and art practice are oriented towards a decolonizing politics and politics of belonging in the wake of the relentless expropriate violence of colonial capital. She is a contributor and the poetry and translation editor of Rumi Roaming, Contemporary Engagements and Interventions, curated and edited by Gita Hashemi. Thank you so much for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tabakoli, also to Bilal Hashmi, who's not in the room here, but is somewhere out there and managing everything, to Dr. Nusha Keizal, and of course to Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute for inviting us to present Rumi Roaming today. It is an honor and a joy to be here. This is my second time, in fact, presenting a project in this dynamic scholarly company. As an artist, I am grateful for the opportunity to talk about my work in a multidisciplinary, critical context, particularly where I share my native language and culture with many attendees. These opportunities are all too rare, and I applaud this institute for actively inviting artists as knowledge and culture producers, with or without institutional credentials, whose work advances our critical understanding of the world. I'd also like to express my personal deep gratitude to the Indigenous caretakers and stewards of these lands and waters that have sheltered and sustained me for over 2 decades. I honor what I continue to learn from them toward decolonizing my ways of being and relating and working. That learning has been a foundational and motivational principle in my work and life here, as it is in Rumi Roaming. This is our second book launch in an academic context. In the first one that was hosted by the Roshan Institute in University of Maryland 2 weeks ago and attended by a few of the contributors, we offered a curated sampling of the content. Because the recording of that session will go online and a good portion of the content is also publicly accessible online, I and my colleague, Dr. Elena Basile, are going to do something different today. And rather than presenting more of the content, go deeper into our motivations, theorizations, processes, and understandings of the work. But first, we would like to share with you a short video about the anthology by way of giving you a rapid overview of its modalities, voices, and diverse content. No? Yeah. That's good.
Hear this reed as it moans, telling tales of separation. Since I was cut off.
داستان آن کنیزک که با خر خاتون شهوت میراند و او را چون بز و خرس آموخته بود شهوت.
From these upside down candles, from these indigo plains, a wondrous disposition arises.
So many times you walk that road to that house. Come into this house for once. Climb onto this roof.
وندر دل آتش درآ.
وندر دل آتش نرا.
وندر دل آتش درآ.
بحر من غرقه گشت هم در خویش. بوالعجب بحر بیکران که منم.
Alan Kurdi swallowed the whole sea between Lesbos and Assos, was then washed ashore face down as if asleep, resembling a baby seal.
خلقتك سرا أمرتك سر.
Calculating risks. So many things, so many things, so many things the body cannot contain. Fires and explosions. Fires and explosions.
شدانم‌های بسیار است، لکن من نمی‌دانم که خوردم از دهان بنده‌ای در آن دریا کفی افیون.
If the body didn't begin a ruse, or carried by ceramic tide from Athens, would past erupt still?
Water has been cut off from this world's river. O spring, return, bring back the water.
Abandon your guile, lover. Go mad, go mad. Step into the heart of fire, become moth, become moth.
Thank you. As you saw, Rumi Roaming is a multi-platform anthology. It exists in print, online, and in real spaces synergetically. It is a co-publication of two small independent presses, Guernica Editions and Subversive Press. The project's primary funding came from the Toronto Art Council and the Ontario Art Council through InterArts grants. Dr. Basile will briefly address the publishing ecology we found ourselves in and out of, and the political economy of working outside institutional context. For now, I'd like to encourage you to purchase the anthology and also to order it through your institutional libraries. And this is not mere self-promotion, but an appeal to support the independent publishers that as a whole make the ground where radical thought and culture grows. Now on to the project itself. And I have to, before going on, I want to thank you, everybody who's here. I was too focused on the screen and failed to greet you properly. So welcome. Thank you for being here in your lunchtime.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you. In telling you about how I come to this work, I have to start by stating that I am not a Rumi scholar, nor a professional translator. I am a transdisciplinary artist. My work takes shape in interstitial spaces that I elaborate, enlarge, and animate between disciplines of visual, media, literary, and performance arts, using diverse strategies, techniques, and technologies often in large-scale, multi-platform projects that are generative through embodied, participatory, collaborative, and/or interactive processes. Being transdisciplinary is different from being interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Rather than mixing elements of different disciplines, transdisciplinary work is about transcending the nature, limits, and indeed the very premise of disciplinary knowledge. Curating and publishing for me are transdisciplinary artistic modalities, not management and marketing structures, which I employ to create larger independent spaces for decolonial aesthetic engagements and interventions. I understand decoloniality as transdisciplinary ways of thinking and transmodal ways of being and doing that foster alternatives to dominant Western universality. Where post-colonial is contiguous with the colonial, decoloniality is about imagining and constructing a different universe. My deep understanding of the world is that the personal is poetic, the poetic is political, and the political is personal. I'll tell you a bit about the personal and the political in order to contextualize the poetics in Rumi. I left Iran in the mid-1980s, at the height of the Iran-Iraq War and the Islamic government's campaign to quench all opposition through mass arrests and executions. In the years that I lived underground before leaving Iran, I burned or otherwise disposed of many books and a rather large archive of political publications, mostly from the leftist organizations that were part of the revolution against the Pahlavi monarchy. The books that I kept and carried with me, rather the books that carried me as I sought refuge in one place after another, were the divans of Hafiz and Molavi and the collected poems of Nima. I crossed many borders and lived undocumented in two settler states for many years with these books. In the mid-90s, I was still a new refugee in Canada and had a peripheral job in community services. A co-worker gifted me a copy of the newly published Coleman Barks' Essential Rumi as a gesture of welcome. Apparently, I and Rumi had both arrived to warm reception in cold Canada. I didn't immediately identify Rumi as a name for my beloved Molavi, also known to me as Maulana, both very intimate terms, my master guide mentor or our master guide mentor, and in more formal context as Muhammad Jalaluddin Balkhi, and only rarely and remotely as Mollay Rumi. The more I searched Essential Rumi, the more perplexed I got. Other than a spattering of the name Shams, I recognized little of Molavi in Barks's Rumi. My aha moment came when I read Barks's notes at the end of the book, just before he offers the tale of his encounter with the Sri Lankan mystic guru Baba Muhyiddin, as well as some recipes, that in fact he does not know Persian, even though he refers to himself repeatedly as a translator. And of course, over the years, he has built a mini empire on translating Rumi. Gifting me the book wasn't a small gesture on my co-worker's part, nor in the broader context. Essential Rumi hit the markets less than 15 years after the so-called Iran hostage crisis, during which Canada rescued 6 American diplomats, if some might remember. And shortly after Huntington's Clash of Civilizations theory justified the first Bush's war in Iraq. Barks's Rumi quickly became a bestseller thanks to the genius marketing machinery of HarperCollins, which is known in the publishing world as one of the big 5 and is also known for romance, pop psychology, and cookbooks. And we can find traces of all of these in Barks's work. With that, Essential Rumi became a ground for an imagined meeting of civilizations in the best Western liberal fashion, with the white American man liberating the Oriental man from the ancient cage of his own religion and language. As Barks explained it, Robert Bly handed him a copy of A.J. Arbery's translations of Rumi's poems, saying, "These poems need to be released from their cages." And the intonation is mine. Of course, Bly could have meant Arbery's dry and rather technical translation as the cage, but putting the exchange in the context of Bly's mythopoetic men's movement, also known as New Age men's movement, which widely appropriated myths, legends, and traditions from different cultures, including heavy appropriation of indigenous peoples' traditions and rituals. The colonial origin and impulse in the dictum he handed to Barks is unmistakable. There are other such non-translator translations of Maulana in English, including another highly popular one by another New Age empire-building guru, Deepak Chopra, whose brown skin doesn't moderate his colonial impulse. These appropriations of Maulavi or Mevlevi are offered to consumers, consumption being the operative modality of engagement, as timeless, placeless, contextless, universal wisdom that we all can and even ought to cling on to. These publications have made Rumi the best-selling poet in the English language, as Franklin Lewis posits. And Rumi's words have been translated in all populous languages in the world, even if often emptied of much of their cultural bearings and nuanced intimations. Not surprisingly so, because most of these translations are in fact based on Barks's Essential Rumi. Against this background, and with all the urgencies going on in the world, why then Rumi roaming? From entertainment to what masquerades as inner attainment, given all the hallmarkish Rumi memes circulating in the cyber world, all the musical productions and podcasts with Rumi in their title, 50 podcasts in 2024 and 2025, according to Player.fm. All the neo-mystic prophets and spiritual profiteers claiming Rumi, and all the neo-mystic prophets and spiritual profiteers claiming Rumi, and all the translations of Rumi by so-called translators who do not know his language, not to mention all the scholarly production, hashing out everything Rumi, isn't the sheer number of cultural products dedicated to Rumi, part exalted, part exotic, part hyper-specialized, part hyper-banalized, reason enough against yet another production engaging with Rumi? Well, actually, Rumi roaming in its core is not about Rumi. It's not about Rumi, Maulavi, Maulana, Mevlevi, or Jalaluddin Muhammad, the son of Muhammad, the son of Hussein from Balkh, or Mollai Rumi. Nor does it address itself to translations of Rumi. In fact, I must admit that reading Maulavi, my master's ghazals, which held profound truths for me when I was younger and on the run in Iran, now that I am nearly 40 years in exile, is often infuriating. More so because the deep aesthetic affective impact of his movingly musical words opens my senses to desire a more exalted realm than this senseless, scattered world of greed, violence, and hate. Neither love nor longing, neither truth nor virtue, neither God nor Sufi, capitalized as abstract and absolute concepts as they often appear, can solace the pain of injustices witnessed and lived. Moreover, I no longer believe that Maulana, our master himself, had ever been able to transcend his own materially bound and historically conditioned limitations and attain anything near the kind of exaltation that we attribute to him, as is abundantly clear from his doctrinal masterpiece, the Masnavi, that, as we might expect, promotes and propagates in many places the patriarchal and multi-prejudicial worldview of his time alongside or as Sukhan Arifane, sage speech. Rumi roaming is an intervention in the neoliberal and neo-colonial politics that, after properly defanging, decontextualizing, oversimplifying, and whitewashing, readily consumes all that is complexly communal and or sacred in the service of the money-making spectacle we call culture industry. Rumi roaming is a transdisciplinary and translingual project, inviting its audience to abandon the comforts of siloed reception in favor of active play in open fields of meaning creation. Here I must say that when we were searching for a new publisher, we replaced the terms transdisciplinary and translingual with multidisciplinary and multilingual because the latter made the work more digestible for publishers. Dr. Basile, actually, would you mind if I call you Elena from here on? Okay. Elena will talk about Elena will talk about translingual dimensions of the work. I just say here that there is a synergy between my understanding of transdisciplinary as inherently and necessarily experimental, transgressive, and subversive, and Elena's understanding of translanguaging. I am deeply invested in art for social and cultural change and concerned with the interplays of the past and the present, the local and the global, the personal and the communal. As a senior woman artist who is becoming increasingly more isolated in my personal and professional survival, and knowing well that this is a condition of the culture of late imperialism as it moves into techno-feudalism and anything but personal, I started this project to hold a space for communing across the distances and distancings. سینه خواهم شرح از فراق تا بگویم شرح درد اشتیاق. I want hearts torn to shreds by separation so I can reveal the pain of longing. Why Rumi? Because his name immediately conjures an intercultural space rarely afforded any other cultural figure from the East or the West. Reading Rumi today, we enter a no place, a place with no temporal and no spatial specificity of its own, a space so full that it is empty, allowing us to enter it with our own situatedness, our own projections and imaginations, our own longings and belongings. Rumi, as a signifier, is a cultural space. An area of my work is what I call embodied writing, that is, calligraphy used as in situ and performance practice. Rumi was originally envisioned as a series of place-based, rather than stage-based, embodied writing and poetry performances in open public spaces in collaboration with local Toronto poets and spoken word artists. The intention was to honor and mark a part of the buried history of the land we inhabit by tracing the buried waters that still run under the streets we walk on, most of us oblivious to their colonial origin every day. The project started amidst gardesh‌های گوناگون, the curves and twists of the sea, soon after the dawning of the Flight 752. While we were experiencing and witnessing the Black Lives Matter and Every Child Matters uprisings, I invited my collaborators, a cross-generational group of racialized decolonial artists and activists, to start from Rumi and go where they needed, to use the space occasioned by Rumi to address issues of significance to them, to claim a kind of lowercase Ruminess. And here I must thank Bilal Hashmi for first suggesting the term Ruminess, situated in their specific present rather than some mythic, orientalized, and/or esoteric past. The first drafts of the translations of Rumi that are in the anthology were done at that time to offer my collaborators, some not familiar with Rumi beyond the memes everybody has seen on social media, an entry point that was not pop culture. The project was to include a chapbook and an interactive mail art accompanying the performances. Can we play the performance? And then go. Ich bin Shannon. Ich bin Shannon. Yep, you go.
calculating risks. So many things, so many things, so many things the body cannot contain. Fires and explosions, fires and explosions. Tornadoes and hurricanes, forces propelled by hand or from clouds. We have our limits, oh yes we do. Fragile moments in the here and now, moving us to make sure we circle the seasons as moon and stars assume their usual heights. We want to stay in one piece. No parts in the flesh leaking blood, no holes in the lungs breathing the odors of death. We want to stay in one piece. We want to stay in one piece. So why then? When it comes to seeking you, knowing your touch and kiss, sure as the universe fulfills and destroys, knowing your touch and kiss, sure as the universe fulfills and destroys. Why do we fly like June bugs to this light, risking everything, even laughing at death? Why do we fly like June bugs, risking everything, even laughing at death? Calculating risks. So many things the body cannot contain. Calculating risks.
That was a clip from a longer performance. Pulling off this one performance during the lockdowns made it obvious that involving real bodies in real spaces was far too precarious. So Rumi morphed into a full-fledged book, still aiming to maintain its original multimodality and transdisciplinarity, and grew as such as we whirled through the injustices of inadequate healthcare, surges in the refugee population in the world, racist backlash against poor dark-skinned displaced people, the war in Ukraine, the rising environmental disasters, the second coming of the Taliban, and the Woman Life Freedom Revolution. The anthology's publication date was postponed twice as we changed publishers. The first time we thought we were going to press the earthquake in Turkey was top of the news. The second time was a year through the war in Sudan and 83 days through Israel's live-streamed genocide in Gaza. When we finally went to print, it was day 375, or year 76 of the genocide. And lest we forget, today is day 558 of the genocide in Gaza, Palestine in general. For the contributors to this volume, these are experiences that we live with, through, and are concerned with as racialized people carrying the weight of belonging to multiple histories and places marked with multiple colonialisms. The contributions cover a wide range of interconnected and urgent themes, including global displacements and relations to land and water, translingual poetics and translation politics, indigenous language revitalization and diasporic language reclamation, and interrogations of the spirituality, healing, and social justice. Rather than laying claim to any prescribed and monetized spirituality, the contributors claim the spirit of the world they inhabit with and without Rumi. The curatorial approach was inspired by Rumi's itinerant life trajectory across present-day Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, and Syria, and counters the nationalist tug-of-war amongst the first three countries over whom Rumi belongs to. Here, artists, poets, scholars, and thinkers who are indigenous folks, migrants, settler descendants, refugees, transnationals, and guests from India, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Italy, Cuba, Morocco, Mexico, and Turtle Island reflect on human relations, places, histories, presence, and our own paths to the sacred through engaging overtly and covertly with Rumi, including with what is challenging and offensive in his work, exploring his relevance to our contemporary concerns and resistant practices, and sometimes choosing not to engage with Rumi at all or walking away from him altogether and declaring him irrelevant. With the exception of a few pieces that had prior iterations and were reformulated, the contributions are commissioned for Rumi roaming. Speaking to contemporary media modalities and translingual and transcultural literacies, the book is in print, virtual, and real spaces. Everything that is translated into English also appears in the original language, including Persian, Arabic, Spanish, and Turkish. For most of the contributors in this volume, English is a second, for some a third or a fourth language. And those who are native to English come from different communities and usage traditions. Enacting decoloniality meant that choosing not to homogenize and standardize their Englishes, which is a violent and colonial editorial practice that aims to erase histories and contexts from language, but to maintain the specific accent of each piece. Rumi roaming opens ample spaces for critical thinking and debate by juxtaposing divergent approaches. It does not present or argue for a fixed vision or version of Rumi. The structure, too, does not adhere to conventions based on disciplinary, thematic, and/or formal classifications. Instead, it is built on tenuous and evocative associations, the stuff of memory, identification, and imagination. Some threads are more tangible and visible than others, but overall, the order of offerings is not linear and prescriptive, but is meant to invite multiple ways of roaming through, sampling, and remixing. In fact, remixing is what we have been doing in the book launches so far, which has allowed for generating different conversations among the contributors and with the audience. Therefore, the project as a whole, not just the published anthology, could be understood as an evolving transdisciplinary communal space where conversations and interactions, those that took place over the curatorial and editorial processes, and now what takes place in combining and recombining the content and presenting the work to different audiences, are active sites of negotiation and knowledge production. Actually, self-reflexively, the relations and negotiations in the project space at its early stage motivated the commissioning of the piece Anti-Oppression is Not a Healing Modality by Zainab Amadahy, which I highly recommend, and is also available as a free chapter on the book's website. Community building and relationality have been at the heart of Rumi roaming. The contributors came to the project variously through existing solid friendships and or building relations of solidarity, the intricate weave that holds us together in times that fray our individual and collective resilience. For the trust they placed in me, I am deeply grateful to, and here I apologize to everybody who's listening to this for skipping people's titles and honorifics. We have been on intimate terms over our course of collaboration for some years now. I am deeply grateful to Carly Butler, Ehab Lotayef, Fatemeh Keshavarz, Radha D'Souza, Mahdi Tourage, Jayce Salloum, Masoud Eskandari, Zainab Amadahy, Papusa Molina, Nika Khanjani, Hjalmer Wenstob, Tim Maso, Anika Benoit-Jansson, Meryem Alaoui, Öykü Tekten, Raul Moarquech Ferrera-Balanquet, Hajar Hussaini, Trish Sala, Charles C. Smith, and my close collaborator in this journey, Elena Basile, Rumi's poetry and translation editor and editorial consultant, whom I'd like to acknowledge for her commitment to decolonial ethics in collaboration and translation and manifold labor through the long processes of bringing this book into the world. Elena and I have collaborated and co-agitated in a number of labor, solidarity, and art contexts over the past 25 years. This project deepened our friendship, for which I am grateful. With that, I stop and invite Elena to speak.
Thank you, Gita, for this extended introduction. Thank you to Gita Hashemi and to Dr. Tavakoli, and to Yusha Saad for Kesar for introducing. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And thank you, people at home. This is unexpected, actually, to be in such a great company. And as Gita has already mentioned, over the last 2 months, we have had the opportunity to present the book in a diversity of settings. And each time we've been able to highlight specific conceptual threads traversing the different contributions. And no one presentation has been the same. And each time we've been positively enriched, not only by the questions and the feedback we've received, but also by the way the project itself is beginning to spark recognitions of cultural and political diversity among artists and cultural workers in unexpected places. Our launch in Birmingham, UK, for example, which took place in conjunction with a day symposium at the University of Birmingham on queer feminist translation, affect and decoloniality, enabled us to engage in an inspiring conversation with 2 young women poets of South and Southeast Asian descent, Brown Girl in the Ring and Savannah Nguyen, an Iranian feminist filmmaker, Sohelila Jawahiri, and Queer Mehndi Nights, an artist that hosts Mehndi making nights for BIPOC queer community in Birmingham. Each of these artists contributed to a phenomenal evening of performance that extended the spiritually situated, feminist, and decolonizing readings of this capacious and generative cultural space that we call Rumi. And here I'm repeating some of what Gita said, but I think it bears repeating. This book is not about Rumi the poet. It's not about reclaiming, reestablishing, or reconstructing some kind of philological purity around his figure and his works. And as we've seen, there's plenty of publications that are taking care of that kind of reconstruction. No, this book is an intervention in the colonial dynamics of East-West translation that is not meant to reassert or reclaim some pure point of origin from which the light of Walabi's poetry might shine again unperturbed. This book is about Rumi only. Rumi dar Parse. It is such roaming that gives the project its specific decolonial declension, decolonizing declension, insofar as it mobilizes that cultural space that is Rumi without the goal of delineating clear-cut categorical or geographical boundaries around it, but with the humble and humbling desire to wander along some of the pathways and rivulets of generative thinking that it has engendered across the globe. And it does so also by way of addressing contemporary multimodal literacies that actively exceed the printed page. Indeed, the book, besides being 200 pages long, it offers also 23 online files, and they are hosted by York Space, which should mention the open access that's there. All in all, the project includes 9 new translations of Rumi's poems offered by Gita Hashemi, 2 photo essays, 2 author ethnographies, 5 critical essays, 1 interview, 5 poem cycles, 2 creative essays, 4 art videos, 16 poetry readings in audio, and 1 behind the scenes video. What emerges, and I'm just kind of mentioning all this just to give you a sense of the scope and complexity of the project. What emerges then is a gathering of plural, embodied, and situated approaches that both critically interrogate the myth attached to the name and the current hegemonic valences that emanate from it, and creatively reformulate some of its most evocative lines in service of contemporary urgencies and issues. And these include translingual practices of diasporic language reclamation, and I'm mentioning Nika Khanjani's piece and Carly Butler's piece here, Indigenous Languages Revitalization, and these are the piece by, maybe I should make it visible. The pieces by Hjalmer Wenstob, Tim Masoud, and Nika Benoit-Jansson. And then Carly Butler, she's just behind with Carly Butler. And reflections of love, spirituality, healing, and social justice. So there's the work by Charles C. Smith, which we already saw the video performance of. Zainab Amadahy, that Gita just mentioned, and Raul Moarquech Ferrera-Balanquet. Whether it is the academic chapters that examine the colonial dynamics of his global circulation and translation, mediated by the vehicular power of English as imperial language culture. And I have my own piece on Coleman Barks' translation there. Radha D'Souza is a very important contribution. Gita herself also has 2 important pieces, and an interview with Fatemeh Keshavarz, or the creative and auto-ethnographic contribution that surface situated and translingual reactivation of some of Rumi's well-known and sometimes misattributed verses. And these are the contributions by Trish Sala, Öykü Tekten, Masoud Eskandari, Hajar Hussaini, Jayce Salloum, and Rumi keeps roaming. Rumi keeps roaming through these pages in ways that paradoxically enable many provisional and yet connected routines. And like Deleuze himself will talk about rhizomatic, place-bound, horizontal, transcultural connections that honor specificity and history without resolving into absolute transcendence, and it's accompanied by banalized consumptions. And while this description is relevant to a good majority of the contribution, there remain also chapters that only indirectly relate to Rumi, and also academic chapters that foreground compelling arguments for dismissing Rumi's relevance altogether to a present moment whose unprecedented awareness of global dynamics of injustice, inequity, and unsustainability does not square well with the deep embeddedness of Rumi's teachings in the social hierarchies, gendered exclusions, and ethnocentric prejudices of this time. And this is the text by Mahdi Tourage. In the next few minutes, I would like to talk about how I came to the project, the specific role that I played in it, and how it has deepened my commitment to a decolonial ethics of translation. And by this, I mean something that I'm definitely not a master of, or in no way, I'm still very much of a beginner. But I mean an ethics that both recognizes the full range of traumatic fractures produced by colonial modernity on different people's organic sense of cultural and linguistic belonging, from genocidal erasure to the manifold displacement of forced and voluntary migration sanctioned by racist ideologies, fundamentalist and authoritarian regimes or predatory economics, and at the same time attends to how writers and artists most impacted by such fractures engage in practices of witnessing and healing. As Gita mentioned, this is not the first time I collaborate with them. It is the first time, however, that the depth and range of Gita's own political aesthetic practices of transdisciplinary and transcultural community gathering converges with my decades-long meditations on the relation between linguistic, cultural, and geographic belonging among writers and artists whose work may superficially be called multilingual, but which is at heart translingual. And by translingual, I mean work that is deeply informed by an embodied experience of living in translation, one that is enacted in poetry, in performance, in visual art, through a purposeful weaving of different linguistic and cultural sensibilities and fragments of being, shot through with longings and aspirations towards integration and healing from displacement and erasure. Indeed, I first came on this project as a serious editor for a small independent publishing house whose ambition was to intervene in the deeply monolingual and deeply constraining straitjacket of translation policy in Canada. The series was to be called Translanguaging, and this was going to be its first publication. After some delays, it became clear that the publisher did not have the capacity to handle the scope of this project, or a project of this scope. As a first-time volunteer series editor myself, with plenty of theoretical but absolutely no practical knowledge of the publishing industry, the realization of just how vast the sea was between the saying and the doing, and I'm here translingually metaphorizing from an Italian proverb, like dire e fare c'è di mezzo il mare, between saying and doing in the middle there's the sea. That chasm hit me quite dramatically, and I had to figure out the exact measure of my own responsibility towards this project and towards Gita in committing actually to this translanguaging series. I had let go of another publisher's offer. So I had to start swimming, and I had to commit differently to the work as Gita and I went hunting for a new publisher. The established academic and literary publishers who gave us a chance to present our project in very short notice, including Bloomsbury, Coach House, and others, had real trouble categorizing the anthology, as it didn't check any of the predetermined discipline-based or genre-based marketing boxes they had for themselves. And this might explain why we keep seeing more or less the same formulas in publishing, proving our point that Rumi is a cultural space. It was the name Rumi that got us a foot in the door at Guernica. This publisher had previously published an altogether different book of Rumi translations in 2017, Speak Only of the Moon, with translations by Manije Manani and E.D. Blodgett. To ensure the intactness of the anthology, which by then had been completed and edited, we positioned Subversive Press as co-publisher, and it was the funding support that Gita garnered via the Toronto Arts Council and the Ontario Arts Council that paid for the hard production costs, leaving our own labor unpaid. I'll leave the conversation on the sustainability of critically engaged and independent cultural work outside academic enclosures at that for now. Hopefully we might have a conversation after this. Rumi roaming may not officially be appearing in my translanguaging series, which I still hope to find a home for, but it does enact a powerful form of translingual poetics. Indeed, the book not only makes visible the manifold processes of translation attending to its production, both interlingual and intersemiotic translations that took place, but it also offers a sustained interweaving of different languages and scripts in all of its chapters, gesturing through them to an openness of situated transcultural connections and solidarities so direly needed today. And all of this becomes actually immediately perceptible. Can I ask? From the title in two scripts that wraps around the back, the front and the back cover, asking to be read in two directions at once. And the inside covers, I Love Chance and Popcorn Poets, is a visual collage that Gita made of a playful take on the funny and not so funny glitches of Zoom's machinic captioning of accented English voices. So the biases in the machine here are also very, very obvious. Yeah. Palpable in most of the poetry in the book is the tension between I think I actually. Oh, sorry. I skipped one paragraph. Then there's the frontispiece page, which decolonially acknowledges the indigenous names of the lands and the peoples where the volume's contributors live and work. At the bottom of this page, the phrase "language is home" appears in multiple languages and scripts, reminding readers of the power that languages hold to anchor our sense of belonging in a world marked by pervasive displacement and disconnection. Palpable in most of the poetry of the book is actually the tension between this mobile and yet fragile and vulnerable home that our own personal languages, the layer of languages that we carry with us, are and that they represent for us, and the myriad forms of loss that cut through it when migration, exile, or genocide interrupt intergenerational transmission, fraying the fabric and forcibly compelling us to lean into English's imperial clutches to relay and restitch their evocative strength. Witness, for example, the lines, and I'm going to showcase Hajar Hussaini. This is a recording of her, yeah, okay, I'm glad it.
Yes. This is a presentation at the Roshan Institute in Maryland last 2 weeks ago.
I'm showing the whole, I will only focus on two lines, but
I'm writing this in the aftermath of the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban regime in August 2021, and it was immediately after I had put out my first book and I had entered a kind of period of dormancy. I didn't know what to write, and everything I had known before had just dismantled, and so I had to figure out my own position that was contingent before, but now that contingency enough of itself was up in the air. So I'm just gonna read this poem. It's called Look at the Moon. First section is Aleph. She reads 2 signs engraved with the last stations. Toward the right lane she paces, where fainting musics leak out of earphones, and exiled people listen to a composite. The train starts moving and the movements quake the primordial feet. B. It's not that she stands still till evening. She's indifferent to the neon light absolving or the moon inspiring old poem. What surrounds the night is outside her inquiry. Just in the morning, she leaves the apartment. The lawnmower greets, coffees brew, nuns are displayed. Hey. Akin alludes to the sea of sorrow without a shore. She's attuned to perceive it not as kitsch, but an inconclusive myopia looming over an event, for we migrated. Khosrow argues, however zombie-esque you interpret it, a mass waiting to be lifted into an oblivion is an evidence that we cannot conceive of living in an ending. There's no need for submission. Ahmad sang, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, Shirin kissing it, emphatically transliterates another one. Day, delay, delay, delayed. Dilam, you have plateaued. Se. Evening shower draws weariness like a moon, reforms the dusk. Crumpled extremities caused by constriction of blood, vessels that shrink my heart, stuck in split dust. God knows how many times dar vatan kharab ma. A segment of the divan, then a dignitary begins the famine, reciting verse so embellished that it makes her pull out of this lettering.
Want to draw attention to, there's plenty of translingual moments in this particular suite, but I was particularly struck, and it was only after in the conversation with Gita we had about this poetry, this text. The lines, day, delay, delay, delayed, dilam, you have plateaued.
May I?
Yes.
It's actually day, delay, delay, delay. That's the delay is a phrase in Persian. Yeah, exactly. It's not delay, but it's delay. But it actually is the way it is written. You read it as delay, right?
So she's playing also on
exactly. She's playing on.
Yeah,
yeah.
Missed some of that already. It's a heart-rending meditation on the. She's already mentioned it, and the pain and cost of exile from a country ravaged by unending wars and the Taliban's deeply misogynist regime. The alliteration of these English signifiers that have belatedness also then move into slips into that delay, my heart, that intensify longing, and into something that, in fact, the Persian reader immediately recognizes as a familiar cultural refrain. I'd like you also to listen to, I'll finish with her. So before going there are similar examples that abound across all contributions in the book and in the audio recordings that bring the poetry to life. So this is actually the poetry of the here and now, of Rumi beyond Rumi. It is not about his there and then, be it that his language or his time, but about the many heres and nows that resonate to us as we read, calling out to our own situated reading on our own transversals of translations. And I'd like to, indeed, the visual and media art pieces and all of the creative and scholarly writing insist on situating and rooting us in the contemporary moment. As the poetry editor of the volume, I'd actually like to leave you with a poet's voice. And this is Öykü Tekten reading from her poem Alan Kurdi. And here the poet quietly inscribes idiomatic expressions that conveys untranslatable of place. We say such nonsense in the East, and ask us to pay attention to untranslatables of time. What was you doing in the open seas in this century? And let me share. This is an audio recording.
This is Öykü Tekten on September 10th, reading Alan Kurdi for Rumi Roaming Anthology in memory of my cat Rumi, who died yesterday while I was an ocean away from her. The water has been cut off from this world's river. Alan Kurdi swallowed the whole sea between Lesbos and Assos, was then washed ashore face down as if asleep, resembling a baby seal. A friend said, "I wish I had died, not him." We say such nonsense in the East, hard to translate. Alan, an inland inhabited by Kurds for centuries, also an epic hero. What was he doing in the open seas in this century? Kurdi, well, you know, an open wound looking for a scab. Why are you doing this to them? What does your name mean?
So just to point out, Öykü Tekten, who's a Turkish poet, also has this page from her her tattered Masnavi in Turkish, translated in Turkish, and her marginalia, which is included in the book. Thank you.
So thank you both so much for this really wonderful, important anthology, and for your sharing your work and presenting these talks. I'd like to turn it over to questions in the audience. But before I do that, there's been a very patient commentator online who has a question for Gita Khanum. Manik says, some of the great poets of Iran, like Rumi and Hafiz, expressed Zarathustri, Zoroastrian values. Hafiz even has some verses in which he says that he could not find answers to some of his questions in the Quran. But he found the answers at the temple of the Magi or Zarathustri priests. He was suspected as a secret Zarathustri, and once a mob came to kill him, and he burned many of his writings before the mob reached him. And Manik would like to know.
Comment on Hafiz's. I'm not sure what I'm asked to comment on. So I'll try to respond what it evokes in me, what this story evokes in me. As I said, we really do not like that this book and my work does not adhere to a particular version or vision of Rumi. I have my own opinion, and as do many other people, or Hafiz for that matter. But of course, both Hafiz and Molavi are very revered cultural figures for me personally, not just for Iranian culture. In fact, I think, Hafiz, Saadi, Molavi, and Ferdowsi are the four corners of Iranian identity, if we might kind of trace Iranian identity in our classical literature or classical poetry. So the issue, what comes to mind is that we have for many years, we've been acculturated to think of Rumi as an Islamic, Mawla, as a propagator and master of Islam. And in fact, he was. That's what his life and function was. The question is, can we read in him other traces? And how could we not read in him or in Hafiz other traces? Because in fact, both of them lived in multicultural, multilingual universes. So reducing these complex figures to one dimension of them, I think is actually the work that the intervention that this book is trying to make in that dynamic of reductionism and oversimplifying. So in fact, there is a conversation that I have with Dr. Fatemeh Keshavarz in the book, and you know, as she talks about some of the leanings or her readings of Rumi, the question comes up, you know, some of these leanings sound quite similar, or in terms of the oneness, the unity, the unifying kind of spirit of the world. It sounds very similar to Buddhist thought. And could we see that Buddhist thought in Rumi? And her response is, yeah, of course, similarities, right? So similar to this moment of, you know, us living in this transcultural space where, you know, the lines between cultures and religions are not so black and white. You know, fundamentalists like us to think that way, but that's not in reality the way we are functioning and we are thinking. And we have elements of these different cultures. So I have no comment to say directly on, you know, Zoroastrianism or Zoroastrian tendencies in Hafez, but of course I can read it and see it myself, right? And I think that that's something that we need to be inspired by, that transculturalism, that modality of being in the world.
Thank you very much for engaging with that.
Gita and Elena, thank you for your wonderful work and presentation. In light of translinguality, untranslatability on this translation, I have been lingering hard the Persian, the choice for the Persian type.
Also,
I've said, why did you choose that rather than alternative?
Like what? I'd like to hear it because
and charch is more
right.
Clearly, roaming. We understand why roaming. Very clear, and hegemony for English language is everywhere. And I am sort of sensing that there may be a trace of English language hegemony in the translation.
Actually, it's interesting.
Rather than translinguality and partnership,
right,
and equality, since you start with mistranslation,
right,
and choosing a title in Persian that may not be as closely linked.
I'd like to
knock me dead.
Okay, no. You know what, Dr. Tawakoli, I have to say that when we were kind of thinking about our presentations for today, I told Elena, I said, be ready, because Dr. Tawakoli will bring up a question that we did not expect and you were not ready for. So just be mindful of that. Do you want to respond to that? I have something that I can offer, but
the first thing I want to actually say is that Rumi may not be as also.
Today, mystic circles in English, it's hegemonic. His roaming is very obviously linked. Dancing and unquestioned.
No, actually.
Because I'm saying this because actually the past few days I was doing it with two things. One that I want to say, one that actually possibly feeds a point to what you're saying. In terms of and in terms of our own, also our collaboration, because Has it been 4 years, 5 years of collaboration? And it only occurred to me, well, I'm not a monolingual in any shape or form. I'm Italian, my first language is Italian, but I am bilingual. I was raised also in English, so I do have that general sense of English. I can read you out the text that I sent to Gita. My monolingual self is only now realizing I never asked you, how do you actually say Rumi, how do you actually pronounce
that person?
And Gita was gracious enough to send me a voice message saying, indicating speaking. But at the same time, the roaming, to me, it felt like it had been chosen because of the assonance, Rumi and roaming. But the work that's happening in Texas now, more close to wandering. Roaming, when I was
wandering, whirling,
but roaming has somewhat at points a bit of a negative set of connotations in vocabulary. So I was like, do I want to go there? Was I going aimlessly around? I was like looking for these typical sort of things that you do in a dissertation. You check the dictionary definition. So I'm not sure that roaming is also as self-evident as I like to think about it, because then what I was trying to tease out of the roaming was the wonder, WONDA, and the WA, the wonder. So in that sense,
I have a few thoughts here, perhaps not directly responding to your questions, but things that came to my mind as you were asking. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge Lida Nosrati, who is a translator, professional translator in Toronto, for the suggestion of that parse. I can't remember what I had when I translated the title to Farsi. I can't remember what I had. That parse was her suggestion, and it immediately made sense. The project actually started in English. I keep saying this book is about our situatedness in the here and now. Okay, so my life as someone who's lived for 40 years in exile, my primary audience is not Iranian. My primary audience is, primarily people who speak language as either first or second language, right? That's my audience. That's the people that I make work for. Occasionally, I also make work that uses Persian language and Persian calligraphy. And in that work, I make absolutely no attempt to translate. None. Okay. So my work in Persian which I also present in non-Persian context, makes no attempt at translation, not because of any kind of arrogance that, I speak my language, come and learn my language, but because I just think that bridging is unnecessary. And I really would like people to feel uncomfortable a little, okay? So we are used to that hegemonic English. We are used to going places and expecting that everybody speaks English, right? People get pissed off if they go to Little India, for example, and speak to a shopkeeper who doesn't speak English, right? Or drive or get on, in an Uber car and get pissed off if the driver doesn't speak English. And that's a particular arrogance of people who are monolingual, and that's not my arrogance, right? My thing is, let's make people feel uncomfortable so that you can actually stand in front of a culture and a language that you do not know and be at peace with that, right? I don't have to have access to everything. I don't have to colonize everything that's presented to me and own it, right? and in owning it, we colonize it, we translate it. No, but I'm saying I don't have to. Okay, I don't have to. So I just wanted to say that's one kind of area of thought. The other thing is that this, so the project does in fact start from English. English is my dominant language. Okay, I speak English. At home, I speak English. I dream in English. I read in Persian, but I'm someone who's lived in exile for 40 years and has never been back to Iran. And I don't live in Richmond Hills or North York. I live in downtown Toronto. That's my sphere, okay? I live, work, write, and speak English. And so that is my language now. I don't see that language as a colonial language when I'm using it, because it's my practical life necessity as a refugee, as a displaced person. So I claim the language as mine now. And that is why I've respected all the various Englishes that were brought into the book, into their work by people who also, like me, are non-native English speakers. So when coming to Rumi, initially, in fact, the title was Rumi Dispatches. That was the initial title. When it turned into, when it was going to be a series of performances, because it was going to include a series of male art pieces. When it turned into a book, then it became roaming because of to point to or gesture to the multiplicity of locations that the contributors come from, the multiplicity of thought and positionings that the contributors come from, and of course my own kind of non-fixed understanding of where this project is, right? So, and of course, as Elena said, Rumi roaming simply sounds better than Rumi in dispatch, okay, or Rumi dispatches. However, what I do want to acknowledge is that, and I didn't know that, maybe you'd like to elaborate more on this. I did not know until a year after the book had, had been proposed, the project was on the go, we had settled on the title, etc., that there was a podcast or an audio kind of thing also called Rumi Roaming, and I didn't know that. Okay, so again, multiplicity is okay. We should welcome multiplicity. If roaming, as you suggested, is a term that within Sufi or Rumi circles in English is a thing, is a convention. I'm not aware of that, and that is not what I'm addressing the book to. That per se is much closely evokes the spirit of roaming than anything else for me. Because here, we're not talking about whirling. I am not at all trying to evoke that image of, here is, let's all dance and whirl and, the whirling dervishes, etc. That's not what this book is about. In fact, we try to walk away from that consistently. Yeah. But if you have a better title, Dr. Tabakoli, the sequel, maybe we can have a sequel to this project and we'll use a different title for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question in the chat. Well, before I'm so glad the conversation is where it is, because, and it's fascinating because for me, this was a very bilingual and diasporic, so with roaming, and it's fascinating how we know what roaming means, right, but we're actually thinking of different things, right? So, and I was really struck by that one scene where Nika is teaching her daughter how to read, and because diasporic publications are so fraught with things, I wanted to know how much of this project was it sounds like a lot of it was shaped by you working against some narratives, and I was really captivated by the idea of, I think you say, revitalizing and reclaiming diasporic language. So could you maybe both elaborate on diasporic language and how much of the project was shaped by sort of pushback?
I'd like to say one thing to do with the decision made in the book for the Rumi ghazals to be both and the transliteration. I did not realize how important that transliteration would be. I thought it would be simply for non-speakers, just like myself, right? So, able to think. Like when I was in Birmingham, we did the presentation there, and the Iranian filmmaker, so Helena, she read Ghazal 1855 in Persian the whole way. And I was sitting beside Savannah, the other poet, that had, and she had the book open, and she went to, not Savannah, it was Sujina, because she has Sofina, I keep getting, she pointed to me that she could actually, even though she does know Farsi, that she could not follow the script. She needed that transcription, that transliteration. So there's this moment sort of again that I thought, similarly speaking to Nika's piece, that the interruption of intergenerational transmission that happened through migration. And in that video with Nika, what is actually most moving is that you have the mother, Nika herself, feeling incredibly self-conscious of her, whereas the child seems to be more island child is kind of sponge absorbing this passage, this linguistic passage being happening. In terms of the actual publication, and indeed the first publisher, that was the big thing of the publisher, the idea really to get out, because in Canada you can only get subvention, you can only get anything either if you go through sort of heritage, multicultural stuff that has nothing to do with languages altogether, or it's French or English. Like that's why I call it a monolingual straitjacket of translation policy in Canada. So in fact, the publishers that we went to also had great difficulty just, like we don't even have the people to do the graphic design for this. Like there's no technical expertise because there's no quote-unquote market, right?
So I have a similar story, but when my nephew, who was born in Iran but raised in the States, opened up the book and saw the first Rumi poem, he's like, "You did this for me," because he suddenly can actually read Rumi, right? and say it. He can speak the language, but he can't read Persian script. So he was really, really happy about that. I think Elena spoke to the diasporic dimension. I think those of us who are settled here and are working here, probably many of us identify with this kind of, yeah, please don't take the book with you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just wanted to let people know the books are actually for sale, not for taking. Sorry about that, but we're
$40.
Yeah. Please.
We accept 52.
Okay. So the I think many of us identify with this issue of being diasporic language that in diaspora and having these double belongings, right? My friend Elena, whom I've known for 20 some years, has no access to my literature except through translations, has no access to my world of Rumi and Hafez and Nima and et cetera, except through some very limited translations, right? And so it was important for me to open up that space where this idea of diaspora, connection to the language in a diasporic context, can be articulated, not resolved necessarily, but can be brought up, right? Articulated. Alongside this, and parallel to this, there is also the issue of language revitalization, indigenous language revitalization that comes up in the contribution by Hjalmer Wenstob, Tim Masso, and Nika Benoit-Jansson, who are artists and cultural workers indigenous artists and cultural workers who are from the Nuu-chah-nulth culture and language and live in the West Coast on Vancouver Island. And their invitation to them by way of an opening was if they were interested in working with Rumi, and they wanted to see if they could translate Rumi in their language, right, in Nuu-chah-nulth. And rather than telling you what the article is, I really would like to encourage you to read it because it's a very complex, what they talk about is the very complex relationship that they have to their own language, which has been, there is now the attempt because of colonialism and multiple colonialisms and displacements that the language has not thrived, right? And now it's a very important work of reclamation, revitalization of the language that they are involved in. And in talking about this, they then look at a verse by Rumi, one of the poems by Rumi that they were interested in translating, and say, well, actually, if we bring this now into this cosmology, the notion of cosmology, we realize we have no language for translating this. Because the way that Rumi talks about, or Persian language for that matter, talks about water, Ab is a fairly abstract understand. We have a fairly limited and fixed understanding of Ab. For them, Ab, water, has to do with the ocean and the storm and the different kinds of water, in the same way that you might have heard of for the Inuit, the way that they relate to snow. It's not just one word for snow. The question is, how do we relate to, the various types of snow, the various relations that we have to snow or to water, in the case of Hjalmer and his collaborators. So this issue of language comes up in both the diasporic kind of reclamation. In fact, in that video that you saw by Nika, it's a transgenerational, because it's the grandmother who's teaching, and then Nika and her daughter are repeating, right? The grandmother whose first language in Farsi, and Nika and her daughter who are, lost that immediate connection to the language because of living in the diaspora. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions. This question, I think, overlaps nicely with what we're discussing. Madia asks, what do younger people of Iranian descent in Canada think of Rumi? I have not yet seen the book. However, I am curious to know if it has the additional didactic purpose of giving those completely unfamiliar or not very familiar with Rumi a context for understanding the contemporary applications, and how might such people make the link? I think you've addressed a lot of these questions, but.
Yeah, actually, I want to just give an anecdote. We were in Peterborough last week, or Nogojiwanong last week, for a book launch there. And the book launch started by we were honored with the presence of a group of indigenous drummers and singers, Nandawagan singers and drummers, Nandawagan meaning healing with drums. And they started us, and the group stayed during our presentation. And at the end, one of the youngest people in the group who had bought a copy came and asked me to sign the copy and said, I did not know Rumi before now. And that was a real eye-opener for me, right? It was a moment of recognition that, as a person of a certain age and certain interests, I am also limited. I'm in my own silo of thinking that, well, of course, everybody knows Rumi, right? And, you've seen it. You've seen he's like, I'm sure all of you have seen on Facebook these, kind of like these idyllic landscapes, a beach, the sunset, something, and, a verse from Essential Rumi and then the name Rumi, right? Or you've seen it in multiple ways, right? And so for me, it was like, of course, everybody knows Rumi. And here is this person saying, actually, you interested me. I did not know about Rumi until now. And now I'm interested to read it, right? And so, yeah, that's all I can say with regards to the younger generation. I don't know what the reaction of the diasporic Iranians, younger generation would be. I'm really interested to know. So please, if you do buy the book and look at it and read it, please let me know.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Jane. Jane, please go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation of the book. I look forward to engaging with it. I had a question and a comment. The question first is, how would you compare or contrast this Rumi phenomenon with the Omar Khayyam phenomenon of the late 19th and 20th centuries, which, although there was no internet or podcast, but it had a huge effect on the art culture of that period, and it rippled on for many decades. And the comment was about Robert Bly and Coleman Barks. Robert Bly, after the Second World War, when he began studying at Harvard, he felt that the American poetry was dead, and he wanted to wake it up. And he began translating poetry from Sweden and Norway and Spain and France and Mexico and Russia and and Urdu poetry. And by the time he found Rumi, he was doing his mother conferences, not the men's movement. And he felt that Coleman's style of poetry in his own poetry was that sort of Southern homey, Southern American homey style, and he felt that Coleman was much more, his style was much better suited to working with Rumi than his own style, which was much more intellectual. And so he gave the book to Coleman and made that suggestion to him. It had really nothing to do with the men's movement, and it just had his lifelong search. Effort to wake up American and English language poetry. But I'd be interested in your answer to the question about Omar Khayyam's phenomena and Rumi's phenomena and how they compare.
Thank you very much for the question and for illuminating us. In fact, didn't know that it's more intimate history of Bly, as you suggested. I do, however, think that you do find Coleman Barks and Essential Rumi within very much embedded within the New Age movement, and that's the way it is being marketed. So even if Bly wasn't, at the time that he gave the book to Barks, wasn't doing the New Age men's stuff or mythopoetic men's movement. The book, the way it has been marketed and the way that it has been positioned is very much within that neo-mystic, New Age context and culture, the way it is being circulated. With regards to Khayyam, Omar Khayyam, I am not familiar enough to be able to comment on that. I'm aware of it, but I'm not familiar enough to be able to comment on that. And if you can comment on that, I would like to invite you to do so.
Well, I mean, during that period of the late 19th, early 20th centuries, we had Omar Khayyam lodges in North America and in England. People would dress up in Omar Khayyam costumes and things like that. But it also had a huge, profound influence on people like Rousseau and other major writers of the period. And it also affected William Morris and his designs, and even fashion. And even theater, Isadora Duncan's stances, and so it really had a huge effect. And of course, that was the turn of the 20th century, and then we came to the turn of the 21st century. If there's something to do with the turning of centuries, God knows. But it had, as I think, a wide range and profound effect on the sort of popular culture of its time, as Rumi has had on the popular culture. And I must say that Robert was never really very happy about the way it was turned into a New Age phenomenon.
Right. I actually came across, again, in Nogojiwanong, somebody in the audience asked a very interesting question. He said, what value would you find in Coleman Barks's Essential Rumi? I am one of those people who got to know Rumi first through Coleman, and he situated himself within that New Age men's movement, and said, for me, it had a profound life-altering effect, right? Encountering this other this other cosmology, this other understanding of the world. So I just want to say that, as I said, Rumi roaming doesn't address itself to any of those translations. So it was important for me to mention where I come from. Well, your article does, but the book as a whole itself doesn't address itself to it doesn't address itself to translations. It's questioning, intervening in the dynamics of translation, right? It intervenes in the dynamics of cultural appropriation, not necessarily talking about the specific forms of appropriation, not necessarily arguing for whether those appropriations can or cannot be valuable in terms of personal or communal engagements, but questioning the ways in which these kinds of appropriations become money-making businesses, basically, in the way that Khayyam became and in the way that Rumi has become, that ultimately propagate something, propagate and advance colonialism, cultural colonialism, rather than necessarily advancing any, exalted cosmology and worldview or ideology of Rumi or Khayyam or anybody else. It becomes, like so many things that are appropriated through these colonial dynamics, it becomes something that profits and benefits and becomes part of this machinery of culture, rather than actually opening spaces for cultural engagement, for new engagement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Elena, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to. It seems to me that, besides this concept of actually colonialism of the language, the concept of hegemony, etc. After all, life without the sense of the divine has proved to be a devastating nightmare. The fact that all throughout the world, people are actually finding a response to this demand, it should not be actually neglected. After all we accept that our own materiality, but there is always a voice within us that tells us that, well, your origin is beyond time, is beyond the concept of space. This is what Maulana has told us. I mean, after all, this is what makes you, and may I ask, I have to say it in Persian, the title of the word parse can also be mistaken with the word porse in Persian. So that's letter has been neglected somehow. Sorry.
It's amazing. Thank you very much for mentioning that. It's interesting. I'm learning about the various ways in which this title can be read. That's very enriching. In fact, very. I welcome that.
Especially, the Zoroastrians still use the word Farsi rather than.
It's a characteristics of Farsi that we write meh, mim, hey, re.
Not to be mistaken.
Or is it meh? How do you read it? And you read it contextually, right? We don't use.
But you mean per se, not for se.
Yeah, we read contextually. Yes, that's the characteristic of the language, and so I think I'm working with that characteristic. With regards to the need for or the quest for some spirituality,
the concept of the divine regarded
some sense of sacred,
and not Islam, not
right. That's
go beyond that.
Yeah. So the question, allow me. The question here, the issue that I want to repeat. I said it in my introduction, and I repeat. This is not the book is not positing that there is or is not a way to the sacred.
Yes.
Okay? What the book is doing is saying there are multiple ways in which we, as people of here and now, okay, based on our own history, situatedness, and experiences, tap into the sacred. Okay? We need to acknowledge that. Otherwise, we become fundamentalists, right? So, and that's precisely what fundamentalist religion is doing. You can only understand the sacred in this way, right? So whether it is through, the Khanaqahi movement in Iran, and, those of us who are Iranians have seen it both in Iran and in the diaspora, these Kelashay Rumi, Maulana Khani, or et cetera, right? It's a kind of a culture that says you can understand the sacred only in this way.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the better way to understand the sacred. We're saying, actually, we need to open up that space, and so people are engaging with the sacred, but in their own way, right? Which may or may not be necessarily through Maulana.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
There's a couple of things I've been meaning to say for a while. First, addressing this, indeed, one thing besides the trans languages that I understood and actually got me sort of in relation with Gita and personally really involved with this project was also indeed the active radical reclamation of spirit and spirituality. Again, in a way that typically in radical grassroots left movements, it's not done. And this is something that, if anything, maybe now the language of healing and of forms of ritual healing that need to invoke spirit or just the sacredness of life on earth, of life on earth. So Rumi seems to offer that kind of moment of cultural space for that, for for various sort of approaches in, and all of the poets speak to that. Trish Sala, Charles Smith, you see them doing that over and over again. I wanted to speak briefly to something that I did not put in my presentation, but which has come up a few times. My presentation would have been too long, but the relation between, something that Dr. Tawakoli mentioned at the beginning, translation, translinguality, and the untranslated. Yeah. The working assumption around translation is that it produces, in Western thought, so it produces equivalence. So it produces this idea that you are accessing an author whose language you have no clue about, you access, because whoever the translator is, the assumption is faithfulness, literality, what have you, it's coming through. And then we have all of the major things around sort of loss. Everything in translation, inevitably there's a loss. What is not highlighted enough, both in these sort of dominant ideologies of translations, is, and the fact, that the publishing industry does that too, we know translation by substitution, right? So I don't need to see that there is a Farsi script there if I have the English, right? Oh, I know Rumi, right? And then when you're confronted with a completely different script or something, then you realize, ooh, there's something there. So the assumption of equivalence is actually, that is the colonizing assumption.
Yes,
right?
yes.
That passes in. And the outrageous thing that happens with languages that are not European languages, that are not sort of majoritarian languages worldwide, is that the dynamics of cultural productions are such that, in fact, you have something like the poet, who might not be the poet in the target language, who might not be the speaker, gets help from a native speaker or something, and then suddenly he becomes a celebrity translator.
Yes.
But in fact, he's not. Coleman Barks, we can say he's actually the author of Essential Rumi. He's not a translator. And he actually says that in his afterword. He says, I am giving these poems a Walt Whitman's kind of a vernacular feel to them, which will work for an American audience. An American, not even British, definitely not British. So I have some British blood. When it comes to the reason why I insisted on translingualism is that what this proximity of languages with one another, the slippages that happens, the delay, one listener, me, my Anglophone ear only gives meaning to the delay, but not the other. And then I'm having this conversation with Gita, and suddenly delay opens up.
Yes.
So what the translingual moment enables, and the book makes it visible throughout, because it makes the process of translation visible. It makes visible the desire to produce something that a non-speaker might think, okay, I'm getting an image of the other language, but without deleting the traces of all the process that's between, so that who receives knows it, might not know what they're missing, but knows that there is a depth, that there's a cultural depth there, that of which you're just having the tip of the iceberg. And then you can have evocative proximities. You can have these moments where
We come to the concept of the primal language after all. I mean,
I don't think so. Primal language will be.
but somehow, I mean, Walter Benjamin's. Yeah.
But, no, I'm not.
Okay. Sorry. Yes.
We can go into.
Okay. Sorry to bring it.
What I think needs to, I mean, this is the moment that needs that. We need to stay with plurality.
Yes.
I mean, there's oneness, but we need to stay with this idea that we're partial, connected, and
as you say in Italian,
celebrate.
No, please, not that. Not Canadian multiculturalism.
Yeah, because talking about
uni per tutti, tutti per uno.
because you have an open field. Difference might imagine still a container. It has all these different groupings. Whereas here it's the last, what are the last? Okay, let's go. Oh, the very last phrase.
It's actually, it's a line from a misra from one of Rumi poems. That's also, maybe we can end with that, with the video too. It's دل از این تنگ زندان‌ها رهی داری به میدان‌ها. Actually, I'm going to read the two lines. It's the book ends with that, but the lines are دل از این تنگ زندان‌ها رهی داری به میدان‌ها مگر خفته است پای تو که پنداری نداری پا. تو دو دیده فرو بندی و گویی روز روشن کو زند خورشید بر چشمت که اینک من تو در بگشا. Right? So if just for the benefit of non-Persian speakers, I'm going to read the translation here. From these confined prisons, my heart, you have a path to the open fields. Are your feet so numb that you imagine you don't have feet? You close your eyes and ask, where is the bright day? The sun knocks on your eyelids and says, here I am, open now. I'm not sure if we have time or we're out of time.
We're exactly at 3. Okay. If you had closing thoughts.
Two issues with two things that minor or small points about translation. One is that I want to acknowledge that, and this is pointed out in the book itself, in the notes on translation, that the transliteration, since Elena mentioned it, the transliteration is the way that I, as a Persian speaker born in Shiraz and reading Rumi in Shiraz, reads Rumi. Okay, but that and we've got to remember that in fact the Persian that many of central Iran speak is a standardized form of Persian that came with whole process of modernity, etc. Through those central media, radio, television, etc. We all learn to speak in a particular form of Persian, but that's not the Persian that's spoken in that's not the dialects of Persian that many Persians speak, and definitely not the Persian that someone from Afghanistan, for example, speaks, right? Balkh. Exactly. So the music of the language, it may all be written the same, but the music of the language, the way we speak is different. And so the transliterations, and this we acknowledge that the transliterations are one way in which people hear and speak Persian, not representing the full totality of it. And the audios make that very clear. The audios make that very clear in the multiples of Persians and multiples of Englishes as they are spoken by people. So the music becomes really important there. The second thing is with regards to, do we try to, in the work of translation, do we really try to fix things in a particular way? I think that was a criticism that I learned to have on translations of Rumi that I looked at, and I looked at A.J. Arbery's, of course, and Franklin Lewis's, and not the popular ones, but the scholarly ones, and Javed Mojaddedi's, and something that I learned was that in fact many of these translations are coming from a place of fixing Rumi within the doctrinal understanding of Rumi. Okay, so if the doctrinal understanding is, when he talks about the moon or he talks about the sun, this is actually what it means in Sufism or in, Irfan. What is brought in is not the image precisely that the words evoke, but what is brought in is that doctrinal understanding. And we have a couple of examples of that in the behind the scene video where Elena and I are workshopping one of the translations, where we're comparing to Franklin Lewis's translation of Ghazal 1855. And I'm saying, but that's not what the actual original words say. So what I prioritize as a person who connects to Rumi, as a contemporary person who is not lodged in Sufism. Okay, I'm not a Sufi. I have no claim to that, no access to that.
You look like
I am someone like Masoud Eskandari, who's also in the book, who is reading Rumi, someone with particular, political history, personal history, who's reading Rumi, not within that Islamic kind of understanding or Sufi understanding of Rumi. I'm reading him and relating to his words and the images that the words evoke. I don't relate to Masnavi that way. I do relate to ghazals that way because of the fact that the ghazals are so visually rich, right? And so simply written, and they're not doctrinal in the way that Masnavi is. So we all take Rumi and kind of put him within our own context. So someone like Ahmad Shamlou, right, can do his reading of Rumi. If I don't know, those of us who are of my generation,
yes.
Shamlou's reading of Rumi, right? And suddenly Rumi becomes not a Muslim, Mullah or something. Rumi becomes a revolutionary poet, a revolutionary left-leaning poet because of the way that Shamlou reads it. And he uses and he brings Rumi and puts him in that context, right? So that you see that very clearly in the work of Masoud Eskandari in the book. That we take liberties with our classical poetry. A lot of us do. We do that with Hafiz and Khayyam and Rumi. We use them instrumentally within our own understandings. We don't fix them. Most of us who are lay people and who read, Hafiz, at the Sofre Nowruz, and open a fall, and we do divination by opening Divan Hafiz. We're not reading Hafiz to understand Hafiz as this mystic, whatever, person of whatever century. We're reading Hafiz within our own life and understanding.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to say here, right? Thank you. We have a little video if people can afford another 5 minutes to play that. Yeah? Okay. Could you play the oneness video? Oneness. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Share, Elena, bottom. Share. Yeah, and then go up, window. Yeah. Oneness, yeah. So, and go to full screen, please. And then screen and press play.
و دست به دست هم دهیم و از ستم رها شویم جهان دیگری بسازیم از برابری
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your interest. Much appreciated. We're all set for giving us so much to think about. It was amazing.
Thank you.
This inspiring visual.
Thank you.
So for people who are at home, it's also independent bookstores in Toronto
and other places.
Here you are.
Alternative list to Amazon.
It's actually on the. We recommend purchasing the book. As opposed, it is on Amazon.ca and .com, but we suggest that you purchase the book directly through Guernica Editions website. The link is on our website, rumiroaming.net. Support independent bookstores, support independent publishers. We highly recommend that.
Even better, buy it now.
And you can also go for in the book, you can buy it now.
Not everybody's lucky as me. Lend them money.
We lend you money.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you.